Welcome to Sublesson 7.1 Explore Linux Log Files. We're going to skip slides for this lesson and jump straight into looking at command line examples. So let's dive straight in on the CentOS command line. I'll start by switching to /var/log where all the log files are. And I'll do a long listing. I'm going to scroll up a little bit so we can see from the very beginning. This is where all the system log files are kept. A few of the examples. Audit is for kernel log audit messages. The kernel can basically log any event that happens on the system, and if you configure that, it happens in varlog audit. Boot.log is just what it sounds like, where boot messages might be. Cron is where any time a cron job runs, the output of that command, if it outputted anything to the standard out, if it just wrote anything to the screen basically, since it was running in the background, there was no screen to capture it, so it puts it in the cron file. It also contains just a log of every cron job that runs. Dmessage is a special file for boot sequence. So there is a sequence of events that happens. We might recall back from the booting and shutting down lesson that there's a whole lot of output printed out to the screen. You can capture that output after the fact by looking in the dmessage file. HTTPD is a directory for the Apache HTTP web server. It will only be here if Apache is installed. Last log is a log file of the last users logged into the system. So you can use the last command and it will read this last log and show you who logged into the system at what time. We can see the mail log, which is a log of any mail that the system has attempted to send, any email that is. Messages is the general bucket for all system log messages. So the name of this file differs between systems. On CentOS systems, it's varlog messages. On Ubuntu systems, it's varlog syslog, and probably other systems have differences as well. We can see that it's a fairly sizable file. For many of these, we can see versions of them with another date. For instance, this file, messages-2013-08-26. So these are known as rotated log files. Once a week, an automatic cron job runs that rotates the log file so that we can just organize the file system better. We see that there are 4 weeks worth of log files here. There's, in this case, from 8/26, September 1st, September 8th, September 15th. But prior to the August 26th, we don't see any. So those have just been discarded, and that's, of course, configurable. Varlog secure. Secure is for security-related events, of course. If you execute a sudo command, it will be logged in here, and we'll take a look at that in just a minute. And those are the most important ones. So let's take a look at varlog messages. Starting at the top, so we see a date and timestamp at the beginning. We see a host name next, and this system is just localhost, but it could be that other systems were sending their log messages to our system, and then this would be an important field. Next, we see the process, in this case rsyslogd. We can see exactly what the log message was. So this content that's highlighted now after the process, this is sent from whatever is sending the log message. So this field is going to vary widely. For instance, in the next command, this is yum. Yum is running some update. It's installing a new kernel, or in this version below, it's installing a new bash package. So this text right here was sent by yum itself. We can just page down through and we can see all sorts of additional messages through varlog messages. Let's also take a look at secure, varlog secure. So here we're saying SSH logs, so it's the same format, date and time, host name, and then the process along with the process ID. And then we see what the message is. So this is saying user disconnected from the system. And this line here is saying we accepted a public key for the user vagrant. This is a new user logging into the system. Here we see sudo. We see this is output from sudo. So this is saying the vagrant user on this specific terminal, PTS0, in the working directory home vagrant, ran as the user root this command fuser111/tcp. And so we can see all sorts of different examples. We can see every sudo command logged on the system. So I'm at the end of the file now. We can even see the sudo command I just used to view the varlog messages file, as well as varlog secure. So This is known as an audit log, and it's required by some compliance purposes to have a log of every privilege command executed on the system. Next, let's take a look at the dmessage command. I can type dmessage, and in fact, I'm going to retype it, and I'm going to pipe that output to less. This is kernel boot time messages. It's information about the boot process. And this is sometimes important. You sometimes need to find information about what happened during the boot. You can kind of page through this, and you can see at what point in the boot process certain drivers were loaded. Sometimes you can search for error messages in this output, and you can debug problems this way. It will help you identify drivers and very specifics. For instance, here we see this line, ETH0 is the first network adapter on the system. We can see that it came up, it became ready. So it's just information about hardware on the system. We can look at the last command. So I typed last, and it printed out a whole bunch of information. We can see lots of logins and logouts here. We can see reboots. We can see bwhaley logging into the system, Vagrant logging into the system. This is interesting, especially on a very busy multi-user system where there are a lot of people with accounts. You might need to go back and look at this for audit purposes or kind of to see what the timing was for different events on the system. And this goes back quite a ways. You can see this goes back, there's events from June 30th in this system. Finally, let's take a look at the HTTPD Apache logs. These are really interesting, and it says permission denied, so I'm going to use sudo to list it. So there's the access log. This is a list of every time a specific HTTP URL is requested, Apache logs that request to this access log file. And if there was an error, it writes it to the error log. So looking at this output, right here, the highlighted portion, this is the size of the file. So if it says 0, it means there's nothing in that file. That means that Apache hasn't received anything for this time period. But here's a rotated log, and we can see that this has some content in it. So let's take a look at that file instead of the empty file. I'm going to use sudo less httpd and then that file name. We can see exactly an example. So here is the date and time. Here's the URL that was requested, just the root URL. Here's the HTTP status code. This is sometimes, you'll see error 404 not found, or in this case 403 forbidden. This is just saying what the Apache web server responded with when this URL was requested. This is the content size. This shows the user agent, whatever was used to make the request. This would be a browser most commonly. Curl is a command line utility to do HTTP requests. So that's what was used in this case, probably me testing something. So that's what the Apache logs look like. That's all there is to looking at the logs from the user standpoint. Sometimes log messages don't end up in /var/log. This is most common with custom applications. You might see this with a Java application that writes its output to a custom directory or any custom user application. It's very application specific, and you often need to consult the application's own documentation to find out where it writes log files.